get you coffee. You want some coffee? You don't want it too hot? Yeah. How many cream? How many sugar? Oh no, sugar. How many cream? Oh yeah. And do you need to add a little cold water? You got your first. No, I haven't. I'm not available when we start. No, I'm ready. Hello, Esther. How are you? I'm good. Do you want to sit here or there or where? There is coffee. Tea. Fine there. Good morning.
Good morning. So happy to see you.
I'm going to sit here because I can't see anything.
Of course, please.
Blur.
So we're a blur?
You're a blur.
I don't want to be a blur.
I feel like a blur sometimes.
Not easy.
I know.
I've got 98-year-old eyes.
Yeah, I tell
We're just
Jan.
kidding.
I tell Jan when things are wearing out. You've used them for 98 years.
So,
Oh, we're not having him this morning?
no, Rabbi Mark has to do a funeral, and I did send out the
He has a
email.
funeral.
So I did send out the email to tell you that we are going to talk about travel stories. And I will start with one of mine, and then we will invite you to come up here to talk to the group here and people out there. And there are definitely people out there. So I would like to start with a story about something that happened to me. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, can you turn off the sound on the iPad, on the bottom? Thank you. I forgot to turn it off. I apologize. It's on the bottom. Rosie, lift it up. Rosie, lift up the iPad, and on the bottom there's a volume button. All right, so I don't know how many of you know, pick it up. My family came from Austria. My mother from Graz, my father from Linz. My great-grandfather on my father's side opened a liqueur factory in the late 1850s. Liqueur. Not liquor, liqueur. Yes, the fancy ones. And in those days, they also made fruit syrup. Now they're quite a well-known company, but that's another story. Anyway, when the Germans took over Austria, they took away the company and supposedly, I guess, sold it to a nice Nazi or gave it to him. I don't even know. At any rate, the factory was not ours until after the war, when they did return it. And my father went back 4 different times to sell the company because it was a big deal to try to get as much money out of it as he could. I remember I was a pretty little girl. He kept saying, "They're stealing us blind," and I'm sure that was the case. In any case, he did sell the company, and in I can't remember, 2008 or 9, they were celebrating their 150th anniversary. And I had made contact with the company, and there was a man who was very nice, who had arranged for us to see the manufacturing place. He was clearly not a Nazi. The man who was running it at the time was the son of the man to whom my father had sold the company. Believe me, he was a Nazi. Anyway, it's so happened that the 150th anniversary, to which Gunther and I were invited, we told the company also owns a hotel in Linz, and they were giving us a free room, and we said, well, our son was coming with us. He got a room too. That was very nice, and because it was Rosh Hashanah, I naturally said we were going to go to the temple there. The temple in Linz was destroyed, Kristallnacht, as so many of them were, and there was a new temple on the exact same place where the old one was. And when I saw this temple, all I could think of was they were making darn sure this one was not going to get burned down if, God forbid, something happened again. The walls of the temple were this thick, close to a foot thick. From the outside, the only windows were little narrow windows high up. And it was really, to me, it really made a statement. A white building. They were making sure that it wouldn't happen again. So we went in for Erev Rosh Hashanah services, and the sanctuary was very small. There were chairs on the left and right for the men, and the women were in the back, separate from the men, but no mahitza or anything like that. And we were there for the service in the evening. I will tell you one thing. They had what was called a Vorbeter, which was a cantor who was praying on behalf of the congregation. And all this man did is stand in front of the ark with his back to the congregation, and he prayed. And there was nothing that people were doing. And I was very accustomed to saying amen or certain things, and I didn't say anything in the evening, but by the morning, I couldn't keep it in anymore. So I would kind of say the amens where they belonged, and the woman next to me looked at me like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? But the reason I'm telling the story is, at one point, this feeling came over me. I am standing in the same place where my father and my grandfather and maybe my great-grandfather stood and prayed. And that just really made me feel, oh my goodness. It didn't occur to me until I was there for a while, and that is the story I wanted to share with you. If there's time, I have a Gunther story too. All right, terrific. Shirley's going to come up, use the microphone.
I wanted to say something first.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, most of you know here. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I've traveled a lot around the world, sort of like Joette over here, who takes cruises, and we've probably been to a lot of the same places. You can't hear me?
This way.
I think this one's better, isn't it? Okay, then we'll call you up, Shirley. Okay. So I've been all over the place, and every country that Gary and I travel to, we go to Jewish synagogues to the best of our ability. And I must say that most of these synagogues are empty. And I don't know if that's a negative or a positive, because the buildings are still there, but many of them are run by Christian people, and for them it's a historical monument rather than a religious building. I mean, it is a religious building, but Jews don't go there anymore. And I remember going to Spain and Toledo, and some of you here probably have been to Spain, and it was empty. And, my concern about that is so many Jews have either been killed, annihilated, murdered during the Holocaust, and they emptied out the synagogues wherever they lived in the diaspora. But it's really a shame that in Spain, that was the hub of Jewish life during the Middle Ages and the Golden Age, and then later on. And what I found out historically, you have to, when you visit sites, you have to look at the history behind it. And what I recall about Spain, of course, we know about the expulsion in 1492. But what we don't know is that so many aristocrats in Spain had Jewish blood. We don't hear about that. And I did my own research, and I was getting off the track a little bit, but when I visit sites, I sort of go into the history. That Ferdinand and Isabella, they were the culprits who expelled the Jews from Spain, and also the Moors. That Ferdinand had Jewish blood in him. It just seems so ironic. So in visiting these sites, I'm wondering, why did this happen to begin with, the expulsion? It was also politicized. But going to an empty synagogue in Toledo is very beautiful. Well, yeah, they turn it into a museum. That's what happens. And the same thing, and I think there was the one in Egypt also that was turned into a museum. But let me run these quickly, then surely I'll call you up. But when I went to Casablanca, and that's in Morocco, and there's several cities in Morocco that are famous, Marrakesh and Rabat. Casablanca had a Jewish, Joette, did you go to the one in Casablanca? It's on the outskirts of town. It's very hard to get there. And most trips that take you to Morocco really don't stay long in Casablanca, other than they have a major, wonderful movie, Casablanca, right. Yeah, I love that movie. But anyway, in Casablanca, it was out of the way, and the good thing, though, is that we had a really nice and sensitive taxi driver who took us there, and he said, I'm going to wait for you. And the reason why it's really hard to get a cab out here, it's like going to San Fernando Valley, where we live in the old days, and, trying to get transportation back to LA was a little difficult. So he stayed and waited for us. And we went through the museum, and at the end, it was run by a Islamic woman, and at the end she said, are you going to tip me? And she didn't even do anything. She just stood at the door. So I thought that was sort of a negative. But it was out of the way, but at least it was still standing, and they had a lot of artifacts there. The trip that we took to Munich, for Dhaka is located, that happened well over 50 years ago. Gary and I had taken our honeymoon in Europe, and we spent 2 months in Europe, and we were very carefree young people at the time. So we went to Dhaka, and no, we didn't go to Dhaka. We went to Munich, and we couldn't find Dhaka, okay? It wasn't like on a map. So you had to ask around, and we did, and everybody that we talked to denied it. Said, well, that never happened. I don't know why you're looking for it. I mean, that was a really bad experience. So years later, I heard from others that, yes, they did find it, and they were able to visit it. So for us, it was sort of a negative that people were in denial. And people are still in denial, as a matter of fact, that the Holocaust happened. So that was sort of a negative. In Turkey, which we just traveled to recently, we did visit a Jewish temple, and it was actually run by Jews, just a handful. See, that's the other thing. When you travel, either they turn the synagogues into a museum run by either Christians or Islamic people, or there are very few Jews there, and they still have services. So the one in Turkey, it was all boarded up. You can imagine why, because of hostilities, and they're still there. So these are my brief encounters. So Shirley, if you want to come up, you can talk.
I have always kept a journal on the various trips I've taken. And this is Israel 2012. And this way. Oh, that's better. Okay. I've always kept journals on all the countries that I've been to, and very detailed ones, which I'll skip, the meals I've had, what I've bought, and what I've seen. And I'll just read you some very significant parts to Israel. I went with a friend who had a relative in Israel whom he had met before. His first cousin was on a trip prior to that, and she went on a tour of a winery, Carmel Winery in Israel, and she's looking at one of the visitors, and she sees a man that looks very much like her late father. And at the end, she walked over to him and said, "You look very much like my father." And it turned out they were first cousins. She had emigrated to Israel from Scotland many years ago with 4 children and had a child in Israel, so 5. Yeah. And, okay, so when we were going, my very first trip was with the cousins, and we met the whole family, and this is the second trip to Israel. I've been to Israel 3 times. And we had a guide this time who took us to various places. And the first place he stopped at on our way, we were going on our way to, I have to see I've saved little bits and bobs of things that I will remember. Okay, I had one thing I wanted to show you. They'll all fall out when I'm not looking for them. All right. He stopped off to see the aunties. These were women, widows of men who were killed by Arab terrorists. They took a cargo container and made a shack to give soldiers on patrol that they could come to sit for a few minutes on their breaks. It is entirely supported and run by volunteers. It was so interesting, just on a corner in a desolate place. We were on our way to Haifa, and I had we were going to a place. I wanted to get that flyer from it. That would best describe it, but okay, I apologize. It'll probably fall out. Okay, we were going to, this is in Haifa, on the Haifa port. We were going to a dinner completely in the dark. You could not see. The waiters were blind. It was, I'm not telling this because I was looking. Dinner was at 8 o'clock. All right, what had happened at this dinner, when we got there, we had a guide that walked in. That was the only light we saw, and then it was total darkness. We put our hands on the shoulder, and he led us to a round table. He told us it was round. We had to sit down, feel our way around, and he said there's a water pitcher there, and there's a glass. There were about 8 of us at that table, completely dark, and we sat there, and we were able to pour water, what we did, and all the waiters were blind. They could not see a thing, and we ate very slow. It was an incredible experience. You wouldn't think they had handicaps, you know. Here we were seeing, but it was pitch black like this tablecloth. And we had a lovely dinner, and I think I even wrote down what we ate. But I'm looking for that page. It was fish and something else. Where is it? Okay, I apologize. That was one. And right after dinner, there was a theater. And the theater had 9 people that were either blind or deaf or both. And they were acting out. It was incredible. The deaf people from the sound, the drum beat, they could hear the music and they were singing. The blind people, it was a sight to behold. And I have that flyer there, and I wanted to pass it around if anybody's going to Israel. It's in Port in Haifa. Do you know about that, Joe? You hadn't? It is something to see on your next trip. It is just mind-boggling. That was a beautiful thing to behold, that they didn't let their infirmities get the best of them. Yes. No. We were told, our guide, we had a private guide, and the cousins in Israel. Yeah. That's really the only way to do it, because you miss so many of these things. It was just exquisite. We also got to talk to a woman who was, and I should have marked it better, because at the last minute I had to find my journals, everything was a mess. But the highlight of our trip was his cousin, son, who had emigrated to Israel. She has twin sons. One of them was a lieutenant colonel at an IDF base near where we were staying, and I don't know where the base was. It was a 45-minute drive, and we got to have a Shabbat dinner it was Friday night on the base. That was so impressive. Okay. All right. We were picked up, by the cousins. Valerie, Albert, and Yael, that was the Sabra who was born there, at 6:30 to drive out to Richard's Army base to have dinner there. It was a 45-minute drive. Richard is in charge of that base. He is a lieutenant colonel. We had to wait for the guard to open the gate as he was davening and had to finish. Richard met us. His wife Zahara and his girls, Leah, who was 8, and Noga, 4, were there too. He gave us a tour of the base. The command tactical center, which you saw the screens and all the different parts of the base, and somebody was manning it 24/7. His office and living quarters. He carries an assault rifle at all times. There are many stray cats on the base. Wherever you went, you saw a cat or a kitten, all over the base. Dinner was at 8 o'clock. When we walked in, all the soldiers stood at attention. A soldier said a prayer for the beginning of Shabbat. After the wine blessing, my friend was handed the cup to drink. It was filled with grape juice. The soldiers were both male and female. There were also 2 Ethiopians. Most males wore kippahs, some didn't. Then the food was brought out, and it never stopped coming. For starters, there were salads of all kinds: potato, cabbage, eggplant, green and chopped veggies, hummus, both fried, and baba ganoush. Next came a hot fish dish with garbanzo beans. Then came moussaka, followed by ground meat-filled buns, barak, I don't think I pronounced that right, chicken with sesame seeds, a sweet beef dish. After that came hors d'oeuvres, hot dogs and, little pigs in the blankets, that's what we call it, and another hors d'oeuvre. Dessert was an apple-filled pastry and small fruit with a sweet pink sauce. When it was over, we were all stuffed. Everyone stayed seated until Richard, the commander of the base, stood up and walked out of the dining hall. Then everyone, all the soldiers, got up. They waited until Richard had left. We stopped to wish some soldiers Shabbat Shalom as we left the dining hall. The dinner was a very special experience for us, and we felt honored to be able to have been there. We left the base and went back, and then to our hotel. But that was so significant to have been able to have done that. And there were many more things that, if I find the flyer, I'll pass it around for or you can contact me. Oh, here it is, the flyer. Blackout, the experience. Here, I have it. If you're going, I'm going to keep this. And if anybody's going to Israel, to Haifa, it's at the Haifa port. It's called Nalaga at Center, a platform for the deaf-blind at the Haifa port, and it tells you all about it. So there's my flyer. I keep flyers for everything that we've done and all the bits and bobs, and sometimes I look at it. I had also bought in Tzvat, the art center there, I bought jewelry from the Yemenite jewelers, and I meant to wear the rings that I had bought because they're very unique, but of course, I'm always a little late, and I rushed out.
That's a good idea. I mean, great. I never keep a journal. Do other people here keep journals of their trips? That's good to know. You can reminisce about your experiences. That's fantastic. You can almost, surely you should write a book, about your experience, your travel experience. It's a lot of, for me, what I couldn't sleep because I was too full. I got up at 3 in the morning and read my book. I wrote down the books I've read, the meals we ate, what we had seen, and we had seen so many things, so many different things. We also went to the border and spoke to some of the, he took us to different borders. It's just, my head is overfilled with things that we saw.
Well, that
2012, so it's pretty recent. Well, not really. That's over. Yeah. Yeah, 10, 12 years ago. Anyway, that's really interesting. Was this off, the base was near Haifa? Is that what you said? Because they drove you there, so it, yeah, yeah. Right. Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to? Joed, okay. Lana.
This is off the top of my head because I wasn't planning to speak, but you were talking about the deaf and blind place. In Tel Aviv, there is a deaf museum and a blind museum. A deaf museum and a blind museum. They're on the same campus. They're on the same campus. You have a choice of going to one or the other. And I went to the blind museum. And again, it is totally dark, and you feel helpless. You're given a cane, and you got to figure out what you are, where you are, and they put you through quite a few experiences. You go through the museum. You know, you can touch a tree. They put you on a boat, and you can feel the mist and stuff. And I remember, and you have to pay attention to the sounds, but the guides are all blind. And and at the end we went to a cafe, and we were supposed to order, and you don't know what bills you have in your pocket, so you realize that being deaf, it happened that I knew what was in my wallet, and I don't remember the reason why, but I knew exactly what I was giving them, which was funny. There was another experience I had. I went to Israel 3 times, once on my own, with my husband, of course, but we were on our own, and we were there 3 weeks. The second time I went was with Rabbi Brisky of Agoura Hills. He's a Chabad rabbi, one of the best rabbis. I mean, he is amazing. And we went to Yad Vashem, and he told us the story of his father. And we were at the Sugihara, wherever the place that was dedicated to Sugihara, and he told us the story of his father and how he escaped to Shanghai, and that Sugihara was the one that signed his visa. And they went across. This is all I can remember, but they went across Russia to Japan, and then ended up in Shanghai. And I forgot the most important part. His father was going to yeshiva. I think it was in Lithuania, wherever it was, and he was supposed to catch a train back to his home because the Nazis were invading, and he missed the train because they had run out of tickets or something, but he did not get on that train to go home. And so he was stuck in, I think it was Lithuania, I'm not sure. And he got a visa to go to thing. Everyone that went home died. The missing of that train to go home saved his life. And so they ended up, his family produced, his father had some amazing number of kids. There were hundreds of Briskies around, and that's their what's the word I'm looking for? Revenge, thank you. Hitler revenge. And Brisky is amazing. If you ever have a chance to hear one of his speeches. You can go on YouTube, and there's three that I remember in particular. One is about angels, and it's about angels that have come in your life and may have saved you or whatever, and being angels to other people. The other one was resurrection. I thought, resurrection, Jews, resurrection. It was about Jewish. We've been annihilated so many times, but to rise again and flourish. No, Jews have been, whether it's the Holocaust or the destruction of the first and second temples, but each time we've come back and flourished. And the other one was time management. I won't get into that one, but it should go on to YouTube, and anything he says are so inspirational, and they'll bring you to tears and laughter and whatever. It's just fantastic. Anyway, what else was there in Israel? We went on one of my trips to Israel. It was with Brisky. We went out to dinner in Sfat, and one of the couples on our trip were from Russia, and they had been married in Russia, and their daughter was having her bat mitzvah on this trip. And after dinner, we went to the rooftop of this restaurant in Sfat, and the sky was crisp, and it was beautiful weather. And we had a wedding, a Jewish wedding, one of my most memorable weddings I'll ever experience. It was their 25th anniversary, and Rabbi Brisky had arranged to have a wedding. We did Israeli dancing, and it was a lovely night. Okay, that's it.
You're caught on this. Okay, so as many of you know, I have traveled extensively, and because my husband was in the Air Force, we lived abroad and did more traveling, and every place that I traveled, as Rosie said that she does, we look for Jewish sites. So I'm going to counter a little bit of the negativity that Rosie had in Germany. We lived in Germany for 3 years, and we traveled around. One of the ways that we dealt with living in Germany, which was kind of like a weight on our shoulders. Nothing negative ever happened to us in 3 years that we lived there. But it was just this feeling that there I was. We went to Dachau. We went to Sachsenhausen. We went to several of the other camps. We also traveled to Poland, which is where most of the death camps were, and we went to Sobibor, and we went to Mauthausen, and we went to Treblinka. All of the major concentration camps. That was our way of being in Germany and honoring those who were lost. Marv spoke fluent Yiddish, and he was able to get by because he also knew Hebrew. He was able to leave out from the Yiddish the words that originated in Hebrew so he could still converse. And several times, using his Hebrew less Yiddish, people said to him, "You speak a beautiful Altdeutsch, Old German, but I can tell that you're not from this part of the country." So it was very interesting. And another time, we were in a store, and Marv was talking to the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper said, "Oh my gosh, this is what we tried to destroy." You know, he was just so taken aback with how beautifully Marv spoke. So it was a very different kind of experience. I mean, our day-to-day life was on an Air Force base, so it was like any American place to live. We had an apartment on the base. I taught at the elementary school on the base. Marv had his office there. There was a bowling alley. There was a movie theater. You know, it was there was a supermarket, the commissary, the BX is the department store, you know, so you had everything you needed, but that was on the base. And then step off the base, it was very, very different. Rosie mentioned Dachau. So Dachau was the first concentration camp that I had ever been to. And we went there, it was winter. And we went to visit, and I was really bundled up. I had several layers with a heavy warm coat and a scarf and a hat and gloves and everything. And as we're there, we're walking down this row of barracks. The barracks were on the right, just one building after another. And as we're walking down, I mean, I can picture it now. I remember thinking to myself, I'm cold, and look what I'm wearing. And all they had was pajamas. And it just hit me that that's what the conditions were like there. I mean, it's like, even though I had seen so many documentaries and pictures and movies and whatever about what life was like in the concentration camps, just walking there and feeling the cold when I was quite well dressed, it just hit me that their conditions were so different. And one of the things that we found in Germany is that many cities and small towns had Jewish cemeteries. And whenever we went, we traveled all over Germany, we would go to the Jewish cemetery. Marv would recite the Kel Mole prayer at every cemetery we went to. And if you looked at the dates on the tombstones, some of them were hundreds of years old, and it all stopped in 1939. And then it resumed. Graves that were added started in the 1960s. So all of the Jews that were in Germany past 1939 were not buried in Germany. Many of them were lucky enough to escape. Others were rounded up and caught and were put in mass graves. But then after the war, people came back. And there were people who came back. Yeah. Yes, because they welcomed them back and gave them, they gave them like a pension, and they gave them business opportunities. And so Jews came back, and so then, of course, neural life went on, and starting in the 1960s, people started passing away naturally, and so that's when we saw more graves. It was quite an experience to be in Germany, and to one of the bright spots. Every year, the Jewish chaplains had a retreat, which lasted for a few days, and that was followed by a retreat for Jewish service members and their families. And the retreat was held at Berchtesgaden. Berchtesgaden was Hitler's favorite place to go on vacation in the German Alps. Beautiful location. But we would go every year. Once a year we would go, and we would just say, he must be spinning in his grave, because here we are having Jewish learning and Jewish singing and Jewish dancing and all of that right in his personal playground. So that was pretty, it just made us just feel so much better. First of all, it's nice to get together with a bunch of Jews when people are in this part of Germany, that part, and you all come together. Because there's just, a few on each of the bases, so you all come together. It's wonderful. But to have that experience, to be together in that place, was great. And one other lovely experience in Germany, we celebrated the second day of Rosh Hashanah at an ancient synagogue in the city of Worms. And that synagogue, Jews would come from the various bases on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and we would have Rosh Hashanah services. The Jewish chaplains who were there, of course, were leading the service. And then people would bring food, and we would have a potluck lunch following the service. It was really quite lovely. But in this synagogue in Worms is a chair they call the Rashi chair. It's a stone chair, not very comfortable, I would say, but they say that that's where Rashi sat and taught for the time. He spent some time in Worms. He was from France, but he did travel to Worms, and he taught there, and so that was, so they say, Rashi's chair. And one thing I wanted to say, Rosie mentioned about Morocco, and I went to that Jewish museum that she mentioned, and one of the things that was very interesting in Morocco is every place we went, in the Kasbah, in the marketplace, there was always the Medina, the Jewish section. They always had a Jewish part of them from many of the cities in Morocco. And wherever we went, they said, oh yes, the Jews were here and we loved having the Jews here, but now there's not so many Jews here. And yeah, but the interesting thing that I saw in this museum, the Jewish museum, it had a copy of the preamble to the Constitution of Morocco, which was written in 2011. And it says, a sovereign Muslim state committed to its national unity and territorial integrity, the Kingdom of Morocco shall seek to preserve its diverse, indivisible national identity, its unity which is built on the convergence of its Arab-Islamic, Amazigh, and Saharan Hassani components, is nurtured and enriched by African, Andalusian, Hebraic, and Mediterranean constituents, which is pretty impressive for an Arab country to have that in their constitution. So I thought that was pretty neat.
I think what was interesting, one of the stories you told us is about trying to find kosher food in Spain.
Yes, Ray asked me about trying to find kosher food. Everywhere that we lived, we were able to get kosher food. So in Spain, we lived in Madrid for 3 years, and there was a local kosher butcher in the mercado, in the market, where each person selling whatever they were selling had their own little stand. And so the kosher butcher had a stand 2 days a week. And so we would go there to get our kosher meat. And the butcher spoke Spanish and he spoke Hebrew. And my Spanish was not good enough to talk about cuts of meat. So Marv tried talking to him in Hebrew. And basically, it ended up, first of all, I was a pampered American because I wanted my meat already koshered, whereas apparently the Spanish families koshered their own meat. But his wife koshered it for me, and he would come out with like a big slab of meat, and I would say, oh, I have no idea what it was. I just know it was kosher meat. And I would say, oh, I want some steak. So he'd slice off some, this thick. Okay, slice it off. Then I want a roast. Okay, how big of a roast? Oh, this, okay. Slice it off. And I want some chopped meat. He took the rest, put it in the grinder, and out came I have no idea what the cuts of meat were, but we didn't go hungry. Then came Thanksgiving, and we said to him, we'd like a turkey. He said, turkey? Jews don't eat turkey. Only the non-Jews eat turkey. So he said, but since the butcher was also the shochet, he said, I can get one. I'll get a live turkey from one of the other butchers, the non-kosher butchers, and I will shecht it myself and get it. And so I had a turkey for Thanksgiving. In Germany, we would go to Strasbourg, France, to get our kosher meat. It was about an hour and a half drive. We could have gone to Frankfurt, which was a little closer, but I didn't care for Frankfurt as much. So we drove to Strasbourg, France, which is a beautiful medieval city, and they had a Jewish community center. We would go there, we would put in our order in the morning, we'd go and walk around this lovely city. The JCC, or whatever it was called, had a cafe. We would have lunch, pick up our order, and drive back. So there were lots of different ways, and we managed everywhere we lived to have kosher meat.
I want to say one last thing about Morocco. Morocco was inhabited, even up to the present time, by the Berbers. And the Berbers were conquered by the Arabs, okay? Morocco is headed up by a king, and the king is an Arab, but the population generally is Berber. Now the difference is the Berbers were not necessarily hateful of the Jews. As a matter of fact, we had a tour guide who was Berber, and he kept telling us the history of the Jews that came to live in Morocco after the destruction of the Second Temple. And then many of the Jews that were living there in 1948 did Aliyah and went to Israel. So a lot of the synagogues that do exist in Morocco are now empty because the Jews left, and they were not annihilated. And the king of Morocco, who's Arab, has been very friendly towards the Jewish community. So Morocco is, I think, has relations with Israel, doesn't it? No? I thought so. Yes? Yes. So it's a Muslim country that is very friendly towards Israel. And I must say it's because of the leadership there and the fact that the Berbers were the ones that basically conquered Spain in the 700s. So, that says something about the Berbers. They think differently than the Arabs. And they really honor their own heritage, and they're very friendly towards the Jews. So that's my experience. Thank you. Thank you, Joanne, and thank you, Shirley, and Lana, and Susie. Thank you so much. So we had a discussion about our Jewish experiences as we travel throughout the world. So anyway, it was a very good discussion. Yeah. This is a better mic. So we'll take a refreshment time. Refreshment break.
Yeah, that's a very pretty skirt. I like that. How many grandchildren do you have now? Just the little girl.
Hello, hello. We're ready to start with Rabbi, so if you can take your seat, please, and sit up as close as you can, or you're willing to.
It is really perfect to start this session after everybody's grabbed a cup of coffee and a snack, because today we're going to be taking a look at the ethics of food. So I look forward to doing that with you, and I'm happy to see everybody. Let us say the blessing for learning, and then we'll distribute some material for us to look at today and talk about today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvot havitzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so first of all, before we move into food, who did their homework last week to look at returning lost objects that we handed out at the end of the class? Oh, okay, thank you. Well, it lets me know if you're not going to do that I'm probably not going to hand them out after today. But we had a document about returning lost objects, and the bottom line of the story, which is a very good one, so you should go back and look. It's about a woman who is in a restroom at a gas station, which I would never want to do, but she was in a bathroom at a gas station, and she found somebody's purse, little purse, like a change purse. But when she looked in it, it had like $400 of $20 bills in it. This is a real story. And so she thought about what she should do with regard to that purse. Now, obviously, in this particular thing, she wasn't going to keep it. However, she also didn't want to hand it in to the attendant at the gas station because she didn't know if anybody would leave it, would take it and keep it for themselves. And she didn't want to leave it in the bathroom because then she never knew what was going to happen. So what she did was let them know. She gave her phone number to the attendant and said, if somebody comes and they're missing something, please have them call me. So, of course, she went through one situation where the person called and said, that's mine. I think she said a little purse, but a purse or something but the person could not actually describe the purse, right, Susie? You read it. And so she knew the way the person hesitated that this was just somebody trying to claim something. But then she got a call from a man who said, that's my mother's purse, and he was able to describe it absolutely completely. And she was able to get it back to that person and found out that in that one purse was all the money from that woman's some kind of Social Security, right, that she had cashed out. Thank you. You read it too then. Excellent. So she then was able to return it to the right person. But then the rest of the document says, if you find, in Judaism, it is really crucial that if you find something, you need to make every effort to return it. If the thing that you have found is something that somebody can describe. So in other words, if you're walking down the street on Burbank and you find a $1 bill or a $5 bill, you have no obligation to try and return that, because how can you do that? There's no way of identifying it. But if you find a little purse like that, it is incumbent upon you to try and do so. Why? Because if you keep it, it's unlike any other kind of found thing. If you find something that belongs to a stranger and you don't actually try to return it, you have done a transgression that you will never be able to make up for. We've talked about transgressions that people can make up for. Like if you, in Talmud, we talked about a little bit about if you steal somebody's money of somebody that you know, or you cheat them, if that's found out or you have a change of heart, you can pay the person back the money because you know who they are and you know where they are and you know that you worked with them. But if this is something that belongs to somebody that you don't know at all, you never have that option. So that transgression lives with you forever. Yes.
I have a brief story. I was in the airport going or coming from the East Coast where my family still lived, and my son was about 8 years old, and he finds a change purse. And I said, oh, we have to turn that in. He said, why? I said, because if I lost a change purse, I would hope somebody would, give it in, and maybe I could get it back. He said, but there's no name. So we turned it in, and we left his name, and we left our name and phone number, and he was very unhappy with me. And I said, Michael, if nobody claims it, it's going to be yours. Well, to make a long story short, a month or two later, he gets a call, come claim your change purse. And I said to him, see, you did a good deed, and it came back to you. So I tried to instill upon him, if you find something that's not yours, try, just try. And it came back to him.
Thank you. We're not going to discuss this one anymore. We're moving into food. Yes. But you were a recipient. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try to leave more time for these if we do them after, but actually, I kind of changed my mind. Why don't you speak, and then Zisel, you speak, and let's just do it.
Okay, this is going to be quick.
Okay, quick is good.
So,
Don't start reading your new one then. If I'm doing this good deed.
okay, so I was at the other end being the victim of having lost something. Actually, my husband lost it. We were recently at Dodger Stadium, and Peter and I got separated because I was going with Joette to get her hot dog, and he wanted to go straight to the seats. So he didn't have his phone, so he wanted my phone. So he took my phone, and he dropped it somewhere, and it was lost, and I was like beside myself. I mean, there's 50,000 people in Dodger Stadium. So I went to the Lost and Found, and he had no idea where it was. And
Did you find it?
I did find it. They found it for me, and because I could describe what my home screen looked like, but it was like three levels below where I was. So I appreciated somebody having turned in my phone.
They did the right thing. Okay. Very quickly, please, folks.
Okay, I was on a train trip from Washington, D.C. to New York, and I left my bag on, carry-on bag on it that had my iPad and my iPod and whatever. And there was no identification in this thing at all, other than if they could get into my computer. What happened was they found my son's phone number in there, and it took about 6 weeks, and I had to pay for it to come back, but I got all my stuff back, and I was really grateful.
That's terrific. It's always good. See, it's always good when those things happen. You know, when somebody else feels responsible to do the right thing.
This happened locally. We were shopping at a store, and accidentally I dropped my iPhone. I didn't realize that I had dropped my iPhone, and tried to go back, but couldn't find it. We finished shopping, and by the time we got home, there was a young woman sitting on the porch, waiting for us. She had found my iPhone. She was very savvy, so she found out my address, and she was there waiting for us, and I got my iPhone. I tried to tip her. She wouldn't accept anything. Finally she did, and I was very happy.
This is the last one.
This is a good story, sort of good. Anyway, we had just come back from Israel, and we were in New York. Can you hear me? We were in New York City, and I lost my handbag, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, so you know how your eye bleary-eyed, it can't remember things, it can't see well. And anyway, I left my handbag behind on the seat, and so by the time I discovered it, we left the train, it's a train that goes around, and we were frantic because it had my boarding pass, it had my passport, and only a little bit of money, not too much. So somebody suggested, why don't you go to the LL counter, because we had flown. They had my handbag there. Somebody turned it in who was in a wheelchair. However, the little money I had in there was gone, but everything else was there. So I said, I didn't care about the money. I just wanted my boarding pass. I want my passport. That's all that counts.
No. Okay. I'm keeping you on another 10 minutes at the end of this class. Okay, you'll be next.
I don't know if any of you or most of you know Adair Klein. She was the head of the Holocaust Museum Library. They were traveling, and the husband left the talit at the airport. In New York, I think, They came back and, of course, reported missing. 2 months later, she got it back. In the other hand, we were in Hungary, going on the bus station. My father left the bag, the talit, the prayer book, and everything. I reported it as missing. Guess if we got it back? No. And that was the only thing he had from his father. It was hidden. And so, yeah.
I'll say one good story.
Obviously, this is of interest. So.
Yeah. No. I'm a hero here. I was in a metro in Prague. There is a lot of pickpockets there in metro and everywhere in public transport in Prague. And okay, and the metro was packed, and somebody was trying to steal a purse from somebody, but I saw him, so he ran away and dropped it. So I took it and looked around, and I didn't know who it was, but there was ID in, everything, a lot of money in it. So I found the name of the person, and I called him when I got home. It was before cell phones. And he was so happy. He said, at least the ID I will get back. I'm sure there is no money left. I said, no, there is all money there. And so I made somebody very happy.
Rabbi, they're all talking about this, and yesterday my daughter left $500 in a phone booth.
Your daughter left $500 in a phone booth. Where? What? There are no phone booths anywhere.
Well, it was someplace, but she
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I had called her, and she put the money down, she went back to find it, and it was gone.
Oh, so she put the money down. So that is the other. What? Oh, so her daughter was on her phone somewhere and talking to you, right? And she put down like $500 to set down while she was on the phone. But when she left from being on the phone, she left the money. And when she went back to look for the money, it wasn't there. So based on what was in this document that I gave you, where at the end we talked about just finding money, would the person who found that money be obligated to try to return it? No. So probably not, although if we did still have phone booths, which nobody does, but if you could find something in a specific place, then it might behoove you to try and find out. However, she was at the bank. Oh, but they could find who took it. Well, that's good, but still, you can't prove. Like somebody could call up and say, "Oh, yes, I had $1,000 in bills," but you wouldn't really be able to know that somebody hadn't taken the other 500. So it's very hard when it's just money, and certainly if you find it on the street, it's yours. So let's go into food. So before I start, I want to let you know that a lot of this is about kashrut, and that's very important. Whether or not you keep kosher, it's very important to learn why certain things are done in Judaism. And of course, if you're talking about food in Judaism, you're talking about kosher food. But I think that you can take a look at this and process it appropriately about why food and ethics are really important. So would somebody, I don't know if anybody knows who Blue Greenberg was, but she's a very famous Orthodox Jewish woman who wrote several different books, and also was married to somebody who we're also quoting here, and they were, real movers and shakers in real modern Orthodox life. So would somebody read Blue Greenberg's? Could you please come up? This is not only an ethics class, it's an exercise class, because if you want to come up and read, you got to get up.
I believe that the purpose of kashrut is to make eating a special experience and to serve as a reminder of a Jew's ethical conscience, as well as of the other unique teachings of Judaism. To me, distinctiveness and not separation is the new Jew's calling. This feeling is possible in the presence of non-observant Jews and of non-Jews. The values of friendship, human solidarity, and socializing are mighty esteemed Jewish values. Making a living and exchanging professional service, sometimes performed over a meal, also are respected in Jewish culture. One of the great qualities of the Jewish tradition is its ability to balance contradictions, idealism, and realism, Jewish particularism, and unusual concern for humanity. Similarly, in the act of eating, one can strike the balance between fidelity to one's own principles and shared friendship and respectful contact with others.
Okay, so here we have Blue Greenberg, we are talking food, right? She happens to be talking kosher food, but she also talks about it through a Jewish experience. We don't just sit down to eat when we are with other people just to munch up the food without thinking about it. So first of all, what would we do when we sit down to eat a meal before we eat the food? We would say a bracha. The bracha, no matter so I'm trying to be flexible. Obviously, I keep kosher, and it's important to me. But for anybody, no matter what you are, what you're eating, whether you bought it at the kosher butcher or didn't, you could still transform your eating experience into something spiritual and ethical by saying that blessing before you sit down to eat. There are many of them. So what she was trying to say is that when you create an aura around food, then it changes things for you. When you sit down at the table in Judaism, it's often because you've invited somebody or somebody has invited you. And so let me just say something that my kids talk about a lot. My kids talk about the fact that now Thanksgiving is coming up and everybody's making such a big deal about Thanksgiving. And then you read a lot of articles and they say, oh, it's so much to make all that food for Thanksgiving and to have those people come. And my kids say, what? Like, we do this for Shabbat. Like, every week we got, grew up having people around. Or, Thanksgiving or like your Christmas dinner. I mean, how does that compare to having to do a Seder for 25 people? So in Judaism, this idea of having a lot of people around may not be what we all do all the time, but it's certainly typical of a particular perspective in Judaism that she links to ethics, to creating relationships, to welcoming people when they may not have somewhere else to go, to not just talk business with somebody, but to create a relationship with people, even when you are in a business situation. So anybody have any comments about this? She says, when we do these things, and one of the things about keeping kosher that does differentiate from other choices of eating food is for me, when I go to my cabinet to get dishes or cutlery, whatever it is I do, I have to think, am I going to the right drawer for this particular meal I'm having? And I'm going to this because I separate these two things and my dairy dishes are somewhere else. So it's not just grabbing things or grabbing food, it is moving through an understanding of keeping kosher and the reasons for it every time I get something.
So I'm going to be gone for a while on a trip, and many of you know Susan Porter. She is coming, and she's going to be staying at my house. So last week, we had a FaceTime visit, and I gave her a tour of my kitchen so that she would know. I mean, I know that she knows about kashrut, but she needed to know where are the dairy things, where are the meat things. My cabinets are labeled, which makes it easier for somebody else to come in and use it.
Sorry, you have to come up again.
I grew up in a very kosher home, and my mother observed kashrut. And I remember going to the shachat with her, and she'd point out to a chicken, and he'd kill it, and she'd go flick it under a communal where you'd flick the pin feathers, flick it, and then we'd get home, and she'd do what she had to. They'd cut it open for her, and if it was a pullet, there were unhatched eggs, and my sister and I, being the youngest of four, we'd always get those unhatched eggs, and we loved them. And when it came to the meat, she'd go to the butcher and come home and then kosher it herself with the salt on a and the blood would come off, and then she'd do what she had to do. And then for dishes, we had kosher soap. In Hebrew, red was for the meat, the green, the lettering, and blue was for the dairy, and the same thing with the silverware.
Did it convey an ethical did it convey, and since this is about ethics?
Yes.
How did you feel about what you learned about the way that your mother?
I never thought about it, this is the way it is, and this is how we do things, because when you're 9, 10, 11 years old, and I really never thought about it at all. So Pesach, it was a whole tumult. Don't ask about Pesach.
Okay. So what do you make of Blue Greenberg? Yeah. What do you make of Blue Greenberg saying that eating food is more than eating food? Why don't you say it and I'll repeat it? Oh, for Thanksgiving, you had grandsons there, and they asked, is this okay in Grandma's house? And were very conscious of what they were taking and using, right? Okay, so I want to get back to ethics and move away from, let's talk about food awareness, because that's where we are moving in these texts. 1 second, Susie. Food awareness. People can just go and stuff themselves with food. Or people can pause. And when pausing before eating, think about a number of different things. They can think about the beauty of being able to have food. They can think about times in their life when they shared food. They can think about their religious tradition that goes deeper than exactly what's on the table into other kinds of mitzvot and things that we do. So what Blue Greenberg is trying to say is, for her, keeping kosher is not just making sure she doesn't eat a milkshake or a cheeseburger or whatever altogether. What she's saying is that it makes her stop and think about relationships and various different things. So all I'm saying to you with regard to hers is, if you keep kosher, more power to you. But if you don't, you can still stop when you are getting ready to eat food and make it different than just munching. Because there's a lot to be said for how powerful a mitzvah can be when you have a thought about the depth of having the opportunity to have food. Does that make sense to you? I really want to move on to the next thing. So now we're going to go to Deuteronomy. So I'll read that one. Zisel, you're sitting close to me. Why don't you read Deuteronomy 22, but face everybody.
Yes. Deuteronomy 22. If along the road you chance upon a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with fledglings or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledgling or on the eggs, do not take the mother together with her young. Let the mother go, and take only the young, in order that you may fare well and have a long life.
So actually this translation isn't completely correct. So let me say this to you, and then we can evaluate the ethics of it. People didn't go to the grocery store back in the day. What they did was have to go up to trees or areas where animals that they were able to eat the eggs from, that they would want to get the eggs so that they could eat it. You know, like going to Trader Joe's and getting a dozen eggs.
You just reminded me, when I was a little
Oh, okay. So when you were little, you lived close to a farmer, and you would get the eggs from the chicken coop. That's great. Okay, so here we are with the tree in Deuteronomy. What was required of people was to shoo away the mother bird from the nest. So it's not just simply about not taking the mother bird and the eggs for your food at that time. It's also a reason to shoo away the mother bird when you're trying to get the eggs. What do you think that means? Why send away the mother bird when you're going to raid the eggs? Let's go over here.
Well, I would think that it would have to do with not upsetting the mother, or, assigning feelings to a bird about her fledglings, which they have. There's no question. There's
That's
a
exactly-
connection.
That's exactly right.
Continuation of life.
The main aspect of it in rabbinic commentary is it's bad enough when, because you need food, which you're allowed to do. I mean, we're allowed to kill animals, but not just because we want to do it for fun, but because if people need food. So send away the mother bird. The mother bird might come back to the nest and go, where are my eggs? But she won't see it all happening at that time, and they cared about that. Also, you're not supposed to be greedy about what you do. That's the second part that's in this. You're supposed to think ethically. If I'm able to take those eggs, how will somebody else get eggs some other time if I take the mother? So even in biblical times of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, we have an ethic surrounding getting food. Is this making sense to you? So let's move on for that. We're going to go into Rab Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who was a quirky rabbi, very hippy-dippy guy back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and he wanted to put forward an eco-kosher possibility. So will somebody read that? Are you all with me? I tried to make it easier for you to find this week. Is it easier? Yeah. Yeah.
I invented the word eco-kosher to say that something is ecologically kosher. I'll give you an example of eco-kosher. The regular kosher way is about the dishes that mustn't be contaminated, etc. If I pick up a cup to have coffee, styrofoam would be the best thing to have. It hasn't been used before, and after I drink from it, I'll throw it away and nobody else will use it. From the usual kosher place, that's the direction to go. But in comparison to what will happen to the planet by my drinking in a styrofoam, I'd much rather make the other choice, eco-kosher. What Reb Zalman doing?
No, you don't have to do that. I just left that. Okay. So obviously this was written a number of years ago, because now, of course, you can buy cups that are compostable even when you use them for one serving. But at the time that he wrote this, clearly every single extra cup that you would use would be just permanent landfill. So what do you make of eco-kosher? Is it just about food?
A number of years ago, speaking of the eco-kosher, the conservative movement had a ruling that kosher butchers or slaughterhouses had to be ethical in their treatment of the work. So that was adding to the fact that the animal was slaughtered properly, but was the rest of the facility also being ethical?
I didn't use exactly the conservative movement thing because I don't think we're actually really doing it anymore, but I did provide some other things. So what Dr. Shalomi was trying to say is that when you keep kosher, it's not just about the food that you put into your mouth, but as Joette said, it's about a whole ethic. That's why it is. There are some Orthodox rabbis, I didn't put this in because we wouldn't have time for it, but some Orthodox rabbis who really have trouble sometimes with kashrut organizations when they're very concerned about whether the meat tastes good or whether it's, whether it's good to sell, but they don't care about the underlying reason why we're doing this to begin with. So in terms of the ethical aspect of it and the way that we treat animals and people and all of that.
Going a little bit beyond styrofoam, the use of your disposable paper plates and plastic, I feel it should be avoided as much as possible. About the only time I ever use paper plate. Okay, the only time I ever use paper plates is when I have a large number of people going beyond the ability to use the amount of plates I normally would have. But I do use them during Passover because I just can't deal with all the cleaning.
Yes.
My parents, my parents had a business up in the Sun Valley, and on the side they had a 70-foot scale, and right across the street from them was a place where they brought turkeys and they would slaughter them over there. And once I went over, and it was very interesting. They would weigh in the turkeys, on the scale. And I went over to see what was going on. So I had to cross over San Fernando Road. And it was so interesting. They had on one side, on the right-hand side, they had kosher. I don't know whether they were rabbis or what, but they had a whole kosher section for these turkeys, and they were killed the reason they were kosher, they slaughtered them very carefully on the neck. And on the other side, they were conking them out. And here, this whole section was kosher, and it was so interesting to see the difference on how they really were very careful about the animal that they were slaughtering, and that made a big difference in being kosher.
Thank you, that's very useful.
Allow me, please.
What are you doing? Oh.
This is an accident waiting to happen, Rabbi.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Ray, for mentioning that. I mean, obviously, the way that kashrut functions is supposed to give the least amount of pain and suffering to animals when they're slaughtered. And we're going to be talking about treatment of animals as we move in with the ethics class. But now we'll move in more to the food aspect. But keep that in mind, Ray, because we'll be doing that again and taking a look at that. So are you ready to move on? So kashrut encompasses a lot of things, but ethics is primary in this. So let's move on to an Orthodox rabbi who published this in 1949, and I will read it, if that's okay. So, a further comment. Kosher is intimately related to yashar, ethics. God's Torah not only demands the observance of kashrut and the sanctification of our physical enjoyment, it also insists on the sanctification of our social relationships. This requires the strict application of the tenets of justice and righteousness, which avoid even the slightest trace of dishonesty in our business dealings and personal life. God's Torah not only demands of us to love our neighbor in that we concern ourselves with his welfare and property, but it insists further on a conduct of uncompromising straightness, yashar, which is inspired not only by the letter of the law, but is guided by the ethical principle of honesty, which then would deserve the honorable title of yeshurun, straightness. So what's great about this is that we talk a lot about ethics and also the eco thing. We do that all now in this generation, but here is an Orthodox rabbi in 1949 who is saying, when you decide to observe kashrut, it's more than what you eat. It is what? How you act. This is supposed to affect how you act and how you think and what you want to try to do that is right by society. So, any comments on this? If not, I'm going to go into the next text.
You bring back so many memories to me. I remember my father being in the hand-grain business, went to Imperial Valley, wherever he went, and he brought home animals, and I guess he would sell them.
Your father went out and he went somewhere and he brought home animals from the farm.
I think it was a calf or something, and he had it on the trailer in the back of his truck.
He had a calf that he had on the trailer on the back of his truck.
And the thing was bleeding, bang.
Yeah, crying.
I was so sorry for it, and it started to rain, and I took the blanket off of my bed and put it over the calf.
And when you saw the calf and it started to rain, you covered the calf. Yeah. That's very lovely. See, Ray, that's an example of ethics surrounding the animal.
I have a question. I don't exactly understand. I mean, there's kashrut and there's all the other ethical things. And I don't understand why kashrut affects other things.
Okay, I'll try to explain. What do we do all the time in our lives? Eat. We eat. And in Jewish tradition, the reason for kashrut, and we'll deal with it again with the milk and meat issue, the reason for kashrut is to elevate our understanding of everything that we put into our body. How the animal is treated, and we'll get to the other part in just a minute. But if you start with the basic in your life, which is taking in sustenance, which we all do to live, it shouldn't just be eating, like, grabbing that burger from In-N-Out. I love In-N-Out grilled cheese sandwiches, so what can I say? But no burger. But it's not like just grabbing something and eating it. Everything in Judaism, when you're eating something or when you're putting on new clothes or when you're doing whatever, what do we do first? Say a bracha. So everything we do that some people might take for granted in life, we are not supposed to take for granted. We stop, we look, We go to particular places. We buy particular food. We get new clothing. We say Shehechianu because we're fortunate enough to get new clothing. So everything that people do a lot of in their lives are supposed to be tied to the ethic. Does that make any more sense?
So it just encourages you to do it all the time.
It, it's awareness. It's awareness. When I go to cut my watermelon, I have to think, now where am I going to serve this? What am I going to do with it? Like, which knife should I use? And immediately it slows me down, which can be annoying, but it slows me down to think about the ethics surrounding things. We don't take it for granted. So that's why I said, even if you don't observe this, slow down when you are doing these things, because that way you can think about it, realize what kind of blessings they are, realize what kind of obligations we have. Susie, what knife do I use? So I shouldn't have used watermelon as an example, because a watermelon, if you cut it with a meat knife, you can still use it with dairy. If it's cold and it doesn't have any onions in it, you can utilize it. But, so it was a bad example on my part.
But if the rest of your meal is one or the other, it makes more sense to use the
Right.
appropriate knife.
Match the meal. Okay, we're... Right. Do they what? Well, it's a daughter religion, so I imagine that blessings come from what was the parent religion, but I mean, I can't speak to that. So you're going to read the next, Susie.
Why did I talk?
So the next one starts with at heart. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
At heart, kashrut is about dignity. And anecdotes about rabbinic atheists help us to understand this concept. Rabbi Israel Salanter was the founder of Judaism modern character development movement, Musar.
Musar is the way that you act. Musar is the way that you act. It's actually ethics, like honing ourselves to be aware and to do the right things. Go on.
The story goes that one spring before Passover, he was called to certify the kosher status of matzah factory. As he inspected the factory, he observed the condition thoroughly. He saw that the matzah, the unleavened bread, was made according to the letter of halacha, Jewish law. Yet, after inspecting every aspect of the factory, Rabbi Salanter refused certification. Why? Rabbi Salanter explained that he refused to certify the factory's product because of the poor treatment of its workers. The women were overworked. Their pay was insufficient, and their needs were ignored because his moral compass would not allow the consumption of the product prepared unethically. Rabbi Salanter refused to certify the factory's matzah as fit for use on the holiday, when Jews tell the story of their ancestors released from enslavement.
So this is basically what Joette was talking about. I just chose to use a different example. So here's an Orthodox rabbi who could easily go into the factory and say, yep, that's kosher, yep, that's kosher, they're doing all the right stuff. But Salanter's not alive now. He was alive, 150 years ago, something like that. 1 second. I'll get you. One second, okay, Janice? Okay, so, he recognized the link between doing the right thing methodologically in terms of preparing food and doing the right thing when you look around, when you take the time to look around. So Janice. Oh my goodness. So maybe not 150 years ago. I'm not good at dates, but it was a long time ago. Your husband went to Salanter's yeshiva. Thank you for that. Thank you. So anybody have any comments about this? About this rabbi who sees these things and says, nope. What did it teach the people in the factory? Taught them to shape up. Now it was tough. It's tough because if you have it's often women working in matzah factories, by the way, the ones that they make by hand. But it's tough because he knew he was doing the right thing because the women weren't being treated properly. But if the factory people did not respond the way that they should in order to be able to get their kashrut certification, then those women would be out of work. So what I don't have any more of the story, but I believe that when somebody like Rabbi Salanter, who was very, very well respected, would go and say, you better get your act together, because this isn't just what it means to be kosher, they probably did that right away. So that's what I'm going to hope. All right, so I just want to know, are these interesting aspects for you? All right, let's move on to the Jerusalem Post interview. Let's see. What? Yes, that's the husband of Blue Greenberg. Do you want to read, Susie? Israel Salanter, November 3rd, 1810, February 2nd, 1883. Okay, so that must have been the original Salanter, and your husband went to the yeshiva, the Salanter yeshiva, probably with another generation of Salanters. Okay, good, then I wasn't really wrong about that. Not that I'm not willing to be wrong, but okay. So, Rose, will you read Jerusalem Post interview?
In 1971, you were the only Orthodox rabbis to declare that non-union lettuce and grapes should be regarded as non-kosher, and you urged Jews to boycott them. What is the basis in Judaism for that position? Greenberg, his answer. We were both students of the Rav, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. From him, did I pronounce it right? From him, we learned the idea that halakha is not just a list of ritual do's and don'ts, but a comprehensive worldview that applies to everything that happens around us. The Torah prohibits the exploitation of workers. So why shouldn't that apply to migrant farm workers picking lettuce or grapes? They were being mistreated, so it was natural for us to apply the principle of non-exploitation to their situation too. It seems obvious. So there's a connection between the one above and this one.
What did you say?
There's a connection between the one above, the
Yes.
reading above, and this one.
That's why I put them side by side. But thank you. That's that. So for those of you who were not in California in the 70s, there was Cesar Chavez was involved in trying to make sure that people who were picking vegetables and fruits and things would be treated properly and paid properly, and they weren't, and so that boycott that boycott came about. And I added it in here because these two rabbis who, Rabbi Lookstein and Rabbi Greenberg, were very devoted Orthodox rabbis. And they took it very seriously, the halakha, with regard to how you treat people who work for you. And I think last week we talked about if you have somebody working for you that's dependent on getting the money that very day, do you remember that? That we are obligated to do that. And so I gave you this experience, this material from these two men. I'm going to share the Deuteronomy. Do you see the Deuteronomy 14? Okay, we are not going to focus on the beginning of it. We're going to focus on the last line. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. There it is in Torah. You should not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Well, why the heck is it there after don't eat anything that's died a natural death and all of that? Why is it there? And it is there because what happens when you boil a baby goat in the mother goat's milk to cook it? Well, there's blood, but in addition to that, that is by Jewish law considered disgusting. And the reason that it's disgusting is, what did you want to say?
I'll answer that question and add my 2 cents. Okay, it's cruel to the mother. Okay, sorry. It's cruel to the mother, but in my readings over time, I came across the fact that the reason it's in the Torah was that it was an ancient fertility rite among the pagans to do exactly that. And one of the things that when you're reading the Torah and you see these hooks, a lot of the times is because God is saying, don't practice the pagan stuff, and which we don't no longer understand, but that's the context.
Thank you. That is absolutely true. But as Judaism moved on, what it said is it's horrifying that you should kill and cook an animal and then seethe it in the substance that the mother uses to feed and grow and care for their babies. So from that comes the idea that we don't mix milk and meat. And in the Shulchan Aruch, which is a medieval document, there are questions that are asked about, well, what about a chicken? Why can't you cook a chicken in milk? And they made a decision not to do that because there would be too much confusion about meat products being made that way. We're going to, so you have this here from Rabbi Goldie Milgram, and with regard to the pain of doing that. So that's where the idea of no cheeseburgers came from. Or, lots of fences, right. But they are meaningful fences because it once again reiterates the idea that this isn't just about the food that you put in your mouth, it's about the ethics surrounding it. What did you want to say?
Once the once the chicken has been cut up, and it's difficult to tell it, particularly a turkey, to tell it from, say, veal. And so that's one of the reasons for the fence, is that you may mistakenly cook a chicken in dairy, or meat, or veal in dairy.
So I'm going to read you this last story because it is, and then we're done for the day. I'm going to just read the last story, and I think you'll understand why after. The author Jonathan Safran Foer wrote this. We weren't rich. This is from his grandmother. We weren't rich, but we always had enough. Thursday we baked bread and challah and rolls, and they lasted the whole week. Friday we had pancakes. Shabbat we always had chicken and soup with noodles. You would go to the butcher and ask for a little more fat. The fattiest piece was the best piece. It wasn't like now. We didn't have refrigerators, but we had milk and cheese. We did have every kind of vegetable, but we had enough. The things that you have here and take for granted. But we were happy. We didn't know any better, and we took what we had for granted too. Then it all changed. During the war, it was hell on earth, and I had nothing. I left my family, you know. I was always running day and night because the Germans were always right behind me. If you stopped, you died. There was never enough food. I became sicker and sicker from not eating, and I'm not just talking about being skin and bones. I had sores all over my body. It became difficult to move. I wasn't too good to eat from a garbage can. I ate the parts others wouldn't eat. If you helped yourself, you could survive. I took whatever I could find. I ate things I wouldn't even tell you about. Even at the worst times, there were good people too. Someone taught me to tie the ends of my pants so I could fill the legs with any potatoes I was able to steal. I walked miles and miles like that, and because you never knew when you would be lucking again. Someone gave me a little rice once, and I traveled 2 days to a market and traded it for some soap, and then traveled to another market and traded the soap for some beans. You had to have luck and intuition. The worst it got was near the end. A lot of people died right at the end, and I didn't know if I could make it another day. A farmer, a Russian, God bless him, he saw my condition, and he went to his house and came out with a piece of meat for me. He saved your life, I said. I came out with a piece... I didn't eat it, his grandmother said. You didn't eat it? It was pork, and I wouldn't eat pork. Why? What do you mean, why? What? Because it wasn't kosher, of course, but not even to save your life? And the last line, she said, if nothing matters, there's nothing to save. So, comments?
When we were with the Air Force, Marv was the only Jewish chaplain at whatever base we were at because there were so few Jews and so few Jewish chaplains. So all of his colleagues were Christian chaplains. And one of the things that always impressed them was the fact that we were always very careful about what we ate, about keeping kosher, about going out with them, about eating together. And they said that it made an impression on them that this was something that was important to us and that we insisted on observing.
So this morning, we've talked a lot about things that we could take for granted in life, but that we don't, and that Jewish tradition teaches us not to. And I really loved the story at the end, because even when this woman was pushed to the edge, she recognized that her own internal being, her ethic, her feeling of connection, and her own self-respect were more important than even the best gift that somebody could have given her at that time.
But isn't it Jewish law that you're supposed to eat whatever in order to save your own life?
Yes, it is. But she made that decision. Joette said, isn't it the case that if you need to save your life, you can eat anything? And that's absolutely true. But that wasn't in that moment for that woman what was internally a part of her and her history and her life leading up to that horrible time in her life. And everything was more important to her to retain herself and her ethic than eating that food. So I hope that it was really fun for me to put this together today. So many different things about food. I hope it was meaningful to you. And I also do have an additional thing for you to consider at home this week. And you can take it if you would like. It is about sinat chinam, baseless hatred, has nothing to do with food. But I really thought that in this difficult time in our society for some people, it's important for us to remember about humanity and people together even when it's tough. So let me give it to you, and we'll see how you feel about it when we talk about it next week. Will somebody pass this out?
I'll take this side. Do you have enough to go around?
Yes. I have plenty.
Okay. Shall we take the other home with us?
If you like what is in this and you think it's helpful to have, they're for you. If you don't want to keep it and you want it recycled or whatever, put it down. I see. This was mine. So grab another one. I should have something on both sides. Should have something on both sides, folks.
Yes, the ones oh, there were two sides to it? No.
And Susie, do you send this on? Thank you for doing that. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I'm glad you did.
But I don't know if I would have the courage not to eat something if I was starving, you know?
No,
Yeah.
I mean, and you don't.
Right.
You don't have to. It's not one of our.
I remember when I was in high school, I had never eaten anything non-kosher. And one day they had lunch with pork. And I decided to try it. And I thought that a thunderbolt would come down and get me. And I loved it so. But, yeah.
My daughter Shira, has grown up keeping kosher, and she made a different decision when she was given the option. She told me that she thought to herself, I think she was in college, she thought to herself, if I do this now, then I'll never ever be able to say again that I've kept kosher my whole life. And so she decided not to. But
It's her decision.
it's her decision, and it's everybody's decision.
And when my brother went into the service in 1950, he had no choice.
Right.
You know?
Yeah,
He introduced me to clam.
different for everybody.
He introduced me to all kinds of non-kosher that I love. So outside, I ate it. I never brought it in. What can I say? But thank you. It was a wonderful session.
Glad to see you, Sharon.